I am excited to level up my podcasting game with these two Plutus Award winners. Welcome to the show, Rich and Marcus.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. Yeah, man. Thanks for being here, guys. So let's start from the beginning. So how did you two decide to make a podcast together?
It is an interesting and long and windy road, but because this is a podcast, I won't go there. So we had previous lives as relationship bloggers, and we were part of the same website in the past. And then I had done that for probably about 6 years. I mean, at that point. So I'd been blogging or online in some form since 2008. And I got really tired of the topic. And honestly, I thought that talking would be much easier and I would get the talking part done faster than the amount of time it would take for me to write an article. Marcus was someone who was super dependable on the blog, somebody who the audience related really well to. I knew that he had a debt journey and that he was interested in things around personal finance. And just given the evolution of what was important to us, starting a podcast that touched on personal finance and career advice made sense. And so we embarked upon that journey in November of 2013. So this will be the 7th year of us podcasting together. We made the show name switch because we did have a podcast with a previous name in 2016. And yeah, we've learned a lot and we've had a lot of opportunities come our way as a result. And can't say I ever thought it would end up here.
So you changed the name to Paychecks and Balances in 2016, is that right?
Correct.
Okay, so when you made that pivot, that was also, it sounds like, a content pivot too. You guys were doing the relationship stuff, or just maybe more of a catch-all. And then in 2016, you guys went, hey, we're personal finance all the way. Is that right?
Yeah. So the idea when we started our first show is, you know what, the career stuff, the personal finance stuff, that'll be like the vegetables, but then we'll surround it with this other funny content. And so we would talk about pop culture, we would talk about relationships, we would talk about everything under the sun. And then in 2016, we did become intentional about focusing on personal finance and career advice specifically, given that both of those topics kind of fit our ideal avatar and not all of the other stuff that we were talking about for the previous few years. We wasted a lot of time and also did episodes that were like 2 hours and 30 minutes, which is kind of crazy.
I love it. Well, so talk to me about what your downloads were like around that time of the pivot and then where they are today.
Yeah. So around the time of the pivot, and it's funny, I tried to go back and look and I couldn't even see the data from the other podcast and what that was at the time that we made the change. But I'd say it could have been 1,500 downloads per episode or something like that. I know that I would have been happy if I saw 2,000. Like that would have been fantastic for an episode. And we've gotten as high as 10,000 downloads per episode. And it has dropped off a bit over the past, since hashtag these times began. So now we're probably down 2,000 to 3,000, and it's fluctuating, but I actually made an intentional choice to not look at stats. So I've only looked at them probably twice in the last, maybe twice since the beginning of the year, to be honest.
Oh, that's such a huge growth from when you guys decided to pivot and, concentrate specifically on personal finance content and the 20% drop. I've actually read that specifically, and it's funny because you guys were right around 10,000, is that a lot of people listen to podcasts in their cars. Nobody's driving right now. And they equate to that to about 20% of the podcast listening audience. So that makes sense that you guys are about 20% lower. It's pretty wild.
Also considering that a lot of our audience are white collar workers, office dwellers who are listening at work. So nobody's driving and nobody's at work. And we're primarily speaking to working professionals. It makes complete sense. I just know that it'll be depressing to continuously look at stats. So I don't.
So you guys have some really impressive downloads right now. And I think the point I want to make here is you guys have been very vocal about you're not going to make a hit podcast overnight. I mean, you guys started blogging you and Marcus overall started blogging almost over 10 years ago now, podcasting for 7 years. This sort of thing takes time, right?
Oh, consistency is a huge part of it. for everything that I've done and for everything that has failed, I mean, obviously it failed for a reason. Part of it is because of consistency and because I didn't ultimately stick with it, or I didn't get the results in the amount of time that I thought it would take. I found that there tends to be kind of this 4 to 5 year period before folks start taking off. And I've seen this with my peers across different online industries, that there's somewhere around the 4 to 5 year mark is where things really start to hit. And I was thinking about what happened for us, and we started in 2013, and then 2016, 2017, that's where things really started to pick up, and things of course continue to grow for us. But that consistency, sticking with it and knowing that you're going to be on a multi-year journey is really important, and also underscores why you need to love the topic that you're choosing to talk about.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Marcus, I wanted to bring you into this and talk to you about consistency with your messaging. So Rich just talked about, hey, it's important to keep putting out good content over a long period of time. Is it difficult for you to stay on the making money, saving money, and getting out of debt track? Or is it become comfortable for you? I want to talk about that a little bit.
Well, I think Rich hit on it. Something that we've been saying now that I'm pretty sure we stole from a guest, actually, so might owe them some royalties, was the key to success is the first 10 years. So we've been doing this 10 to 13 years, depending on your math. I think I've been rounding down lately. But to answer the question, it's actually easier now because we're focused on a topic that we're interested in. So I kind of been joking around that, personal finance got cool, but I've been an auditor for 15 years. So I've been in this nerd space I'm pretty seniored in this nerd space. So I'm glad that everyone's finally caught up. And it actually took me those 15 years to niche down and get comfortable with that. It's like, look, I've been in denial about being an auditor. I joke that it's like the mafia because I got out for a little bit and they came dragging me back like, no, you're not done yet. Run this division. So I keep trying to leave the field, but I'm an auditor, tried and true. I follow the data. I follow the evidence. I use facts to form opinions instead of opinions to form facts. And life is a niche.
I love it, man. And you guys have been together for quite a while. So talk to me about what's the secret sauce to not getting sick of your partner?
Not seeing each other in person. Well, that's also kind of crazy too, because we've been working together in some form since 2010, but we didn't actually meet in person for the first time until either 2016 or 17, and it was actually at FinCon. That was the first time that we met in person. And I think we've probably seen each other a handful of times overall, mainly at conferences. Maybe if I was in Austin here and there. We'd be lying if we said it's been all easy at all times and we agree on everything. We've definitely had some disagreements, but I think what's important is that we learn from them and then we put a plan in place, or we agree in terms of how we're going to work going forward, even with creating products and services. I'm someone who likes to spend a lot of time in my head trying to get things perfect, and Marcus is much more, let's just get this out there. And we've had to compromise on that and find a balance between speed and also quality. And it's honestly been having some real straightforward conversations over time and understanding what's going on in each other's lives. I mean, we ain't gossiping or anything like that, but that's made it a lot easier. And then, of course, we're on Slack throughout the day as well. So we're in pretty regular communication.
That's cool. So, Marcus, what's the division of labor then between you guys two? How do you split it up?
It's actually a great question. So that's what I was going to hit on. Rich actually said it recently in one of his talks that you can't escape the work. And so we tried for probably at least the first 2 years after we had it formally incorporated as a business to deny that it was a business and like, oh, we're just two guys having fun. We're lackadaisical. We're cool. We don't even wear collared shirts, And then one day we're like, we got to figure out the division of labor, to your exact question. And I tried for arguably 2 years. Maybe I should have done it in year one to avoid it. But I had to Google like org chart. And then I kind of find a couple of images for org charts. And I sent Rich one. I'm like, what do you think of this? And I was like, I think you should run the podcast. But really what it did was give some clarity. One of the sayings is, I hope the toes I step on aren't attached to the asses I have to kiss tomorrow. I think what keeps us at peace is, we're always focused on Paychecks and Balances, the business. So when we keep in mind that we're both trying to do whatever works for us and to get there, to move Paychecks and Balances forward, it helps ground us. So we did put an org chart together. So the division of labor, I pretty much turned the podcast over to Rich. And we also realized something very obvious that should have been a Venn diagram is like, I don't like all the technical sides of the podcast and all the things, which, I break technical stuff every day of the week. So that should have been pretty obvious to us. But like, I was like, oh, what do you think about this? Break on the podcast. And I'm sure Rich was behind the scenes like this guy. And then on the blog, which I like and enjoy doing, which comes natural to me, and I could, write all day long, Rich was like, I don't want to deal with that. So it should have been very obvious to us, but we really kind of had that day where it's like, okay, let's really get a clear business plan, the thing that you try to avoid. Probably all the marketers and business at home like, oh man, they need my help. But for us, that was like a great aha moment. So we split the house, if you will. And, if you've seen, we actually having that strong foundation made a stronger Paychecks and Balances on the outside. The output that is what the people see.
You would not believe how many documents and processes and things we have behind the scenes for being such a small team.
I think that's a really good call to action for a lot of people too, is just if you're doing this as a partnership, who has the strengths in certain areas or who has the interest in certain areas too. And for the ones that you don't have interested in, maybe your partner can do that, or maybe you outsource it, right? Are there areas you guys have outsourced in your business that have helped you too?
Yeah. So we do have a virtual assistant. She's actually a member of the FinCon community. Shout out to Amy. Not sure if she wants the full name out there, but shout out to her. That was really important, especially with us both having day jobs. I found myself just getting bogged down in a lot of administrative tasks in terms of reaching out to guests and things like managing the books behind the scenes and making sure that all of our finances are in order and giving us a view every month of how we're growing across all the various platforms. She manages all that stuff for us. That gets me back several hours per month. And then I know in terms of guest management, where Marcus was doing a lot of that before, I know that's getting him back time as well. We do also have a podcast producer. Shout out to Eric as well. And having him on board has gotten me, man, I want to say it's probably gotten me 12 hours back per month when I think about the amount of time that I would spend editing, because I was doing the editing probably for the first six years or something like that. For me, it always worked out to be that editing was 2 to 3x the length of the episode. So I knew if it took 30 minutes, then I was probably going to be editing for 90 minutes. And that includes getting everything uploaded to the hosting platform, et cetera. And having those two buckets of work off the plate, I mean, it's been so worth it. I actually wish that we brought an editor on board sooner and got a virtual assistant on board sooner too.
Well, that's awesome. I think that's a good call for everybody too, that who are doing it all right now and feeling a little bit overwhelmed because they love it, but they're feeling a little overwhelmed that, hey, it's worth it. It might cost a little bit of money in the beginning, but hopefully it'll free you up to, to grow your business or just go back to enjoy the parts that you started it for, right? I started to create conversations and have fun, chats with people. So I'm glad you guys are finding that and still seeing this major growth. So I wanted to talk a couple things about show mechanics, because in your talk in 2018, you talked about the importance of a tight intro. And I wanted to talk about that because I listened to a few of your shows, especially the intros before we got on, and I see you guys have that tight on the intro and you have it tight on the outro. Can you talk about the importance of that and the consistency of it as well?
It's funny because the intro that is in the episode that we released today, at the time we were recording this, is probably 2x or 3x the duration of our normal intro, because we had a couple of things we needed to talk about up front. What's been key for us is quickly establishing what the show is about, and then we do have a little bit of back and forth, but we try to get into the conversation, if it's with a guest or if it's just amongst us, as quickly as possible. Because back in the day, sometimes we would have a whole 10-minute conversation before we even introduced ourselves. And you got people coming in like, what are these guys talking about? The show is called this name that is redacted, and I can't tell what's going on here. And you have a very limited amount of time to convert that person who's casually perusing your show into a listener. And so very quickly, literally the first sentence is, you're now listening to Paychecks and Balances, where we cover personal finance and career advice. And we're into the interview usually within that first 2 minutes. And I think us very clearly getting to the topic and not having a whole lot of fluff around it, but still getting a sense of the fact that we're fun up front is part of what's helped us be able to convert people into long-term listeners.
Yeah, that's great. Marcus, and I know you guys have talked about this in the past too. Having it be fun is really important to you. Talk about why that's the case.
Well, I think that that's the theme of the podcast. That's been the thing that's been consistent from the beginning. We've changed the motto a little bit. So Rich hit on it there. So we help millennials make money, save money, and get out of debt. Is originally lift your paychecks and lower your balances. And then before that, I think it was fun and informative. But fun and informative, which was fun-formative for us because, like Brad Jelena, you got to bring it all together because we're millennials. That's been consistent throughout. And you talked about it is we want it to be something that we enjoy. But one thing that I wanted to point out there, especially for those people who are looking to turn this into a business and grow revenue and grow profit, which is, obviously something we're vested in now 3 years into the business. I did read something that made me feel better because I read that Snapchat's 3 years in and they lost 1.8 billion last year. So I'm like, all right,
we're doing all right.
we're doing okay, So, all right. So that made me feel a little bit better that like this whole growth model, they're like forecasting another 3 years they'll be profitable. I'm like, okay, very optimistic. But I say that because really what I'm focusing on now from a business perspective is, yes, I do want to have fun. This is my hashtag side hustle. This is what I do on the side. But is the activity that I'm doing now moving the business forward? And I think Rich spoke to that with editing. For me, it's writing. I could write 1,500 word post. Honestly, I could write 3,000 word posts because I'm long-winded. I like words. I like writing. Is that the best use of my time? Is that going to rank in the SEO? Am I doing this for Marcus or am I doing this for the reader? Am I doing this for the listener who's ultimately might convert to a reader? And I think a lot of people, like you said, it's a great place to start because you got to have that passion. And I think that's something you need to maintain. But if you're going to build into a business beyond the side hustle and the passion, especially going to generate revenue, is what you're doing the best use of time. So Rich spending 12 hours, I think he was saying, doing podcast editing was not the best use of his time for Paychecks and Balances as a business. Maybe down the road, he can get back to that, when we're like the reverse of Snapchat making 1.8 billion. Or I was about to say like Snapchat. I was like, wait a minute, it's not going to work for the metaphor. So you could get back to those things you can enjoy. And what I do is I try to carve those out in the mechanics. So I like writing, but now I start with generate this post for SEO because I'm on the blog side of the house. 3-4 paragraphs, and I try to keep them tight, 500 words. These are things I've learned over the years, and tighter than that if I can. There's one post, and I'm actually a little upset that it did so well. It's your free net worth calculator, and it's like 200 words, an introduction to a free net worth calculator, and it's like at the top because it's something people are interested in. It's right there available on the website. And I was upset because it only took 200 words to drive the type of traffic I would normally write 3,000 words for. So, it's one of those give or take. But that's a good example of that's a short use of my time that was a great product for Paychecks and Balances.
That's great. And then, so Marcus, talk to me about, do you also, during your interviews, because this is an opportunity for people, if they're doing it, is they interview somebody, and then how do you guys do your show notes? Or is that a blog post? How are you doing that now?
So for us, we've had our show notes in the background for a pretty long time, and as Rich highlighted, we use Slack for our inner communications. But it's a DM or an IM tool. It doesn't really matter which one. It works for us. Works great for us. So our 3 primary tools are Slack, Trello for project organization, and then Rich can speak to the software. I've actually already forgot it, which tells you why I don't run the software side of the house for the actual podcast. But it's just really organization. So to the people outward facing, they just think we're having a fun, formative conversation. Oh, these guys are so natural. They got riffs and they got jokes. Some of the jokes are natural. But the organization of the segments and how we're going to approach the show, we actually do a lot of research there. Another one that I like to use is listen notes as well, because then I can type in a guest and I can just get a feel for how they answer questions. If I ask them, hey, what time is it? Do they tell me how to build a watch, or they tell me 9:28? Like how long is their response going to be? Because there's been guests where we're like, oh, we're going to talk for an hour, and they're so sharp. Chris Hogan comes to mind, a professional organized radio interview. He's like, yes, no. Well, actually, he was like, yes, no, that's correct, sir. And I was like, dude, I'm IM Rich, like, yo, you got to jump in with a question. Like, he's moving too quickly through these questions, where other people, I'm like, tell me a little bit about yourself. And like, we're 45 minutes into the show. And so you can organize for that by going to listen notes and using these tools to keep you focused.
Oh, I think that's great. Yeah, I had a chance to interview Chris too. I think I developed maybe 20 questions, and I'm like, all right, this will last a long time. And like 5 minutes in, I'm like, oh man, I got nothing left.
Exactly.
That's great. So, Rich, let's talk about promotion of the podcast. How do you guys get more people to show up? I mean, these numbers are fantastic that you have. How do you promote your show?
Yeah, a lot of it is word of mouth. We're always encouraging our audience to tell other people about the show. We've met a lot of folks in the personal finance community and in the podcasting community through conferences. So going on other podcasts has been really helpful for promoting the show. And it's something that, quite honestly, I need to start doing a lot more of, especially now, given that the numbers are going down a bit. I'm like, I guess it's time to get out there and pound the pavement and campaign for P&B. And then also, I did meet somebody from Apple Podcasts a few years ago at one of the conferences, and we kind of developed a relationship. They're also based out here in the Bay Area as well. And they had featured us one time as part of their Black History Month feature section that they have run every year. I just reached back out to that name, who obviously worked with the person that I'd met at the conference, and said, hey, you've featured us before. We ended up getting a feature for Financial Literacy Month, where we said, hey, we know Financial Literacy Month is coming up. We have this great guest. And we actually pitched a few episodes to them for episodes that would be a great fit. And that feature helped us out. And then that feature actually led to other opportunities, which I think Marcus can speak on as well. And I think people forget that all of these various podcast listening platforms that are out there, or at least a lot of them, they have these featured, curated sections, and you can contact them and ask to be featured there. And I think that that's an opportunity that a lot of folks miss out on, where you can find an email address somewhere and just reach out and ask, hey, how do I get featured, or what's the process for it? Or you can just reach out directly and say, hey, I have a great idea for a potential feature. What do you guys think of this? So there's a lot of opportunities that people don't think about in terms of direct outreach versus just waiting for everything to come to them.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think that's a great call to action to people, especially Apple Podcast. I don't know the specific numbers right now, but I still think that the majority of podcast listens are still coming from that platform. So taking it, it's like the Google of podcasts, right? I mean, for search. So taking advantage of that, seeing what you can do to get on there and get featured, it can't hurt to ask, right? I mean, that's how you get stuff. So Marcus, Rich just talked about, seizing opportunities that you guys have gotten from the podcast. He mentioned you had an opportunity too. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, sir. Always be preparing. So we were releasing the smooth sounds of P&B, just minding our collective businesses on our relative coast. And a producer from CBS News was actually looking for, I think at the time, a FIRE panel, so Financial Independence Retire Early. And they were pulling together a number of listeners, and they heard the smooth sounds of P&B, and that ended up getting us flown out to New York City to talk on CBS News. So that first opportunity was a panel, as I said, speaking about FIRE and a number of other debt management, personal finances, which is natural to everyone now, but was kind of talking about the millennial audience and what you could do with your finances. And from that panel, I actually met a senior producer from Yahoo Finance, and that led to 2 additional interviews, both of which are available on Yahoo Finance, video interviews. So one was how I raised my salary 400%, and the other was a Slay Your Debt panel. As Rich said, you go along for years. We recording podcasts like any other week. And, just like that, opportunity after 10 years came overnight.
And something else that has been really important that I've always had in mind is you never know who's listening. And so with every single episode, you never know, even if you're not getting the downloads you think that you should have or that you want to have, you never know who is checking you out on that day. You never know who is reading that first email after they subscribe to your list. Somebody checking out your social media for the first time. I mean, I'm saying this and it sounds pretty stressful because it sounds like somebody is always watching, but that's the truth. You never know when an opportunity is going to come your way, and you never know when you could be costing yourselves and you never know when you could be costing yourself an opportunity and at the same time.
Yeah, I'd like to kind of put a bow or maybe a bookend on the earlier conversation. It's also it led to a pivot pre-Rona. We'll see what happens post-Rona. But it also led to a bunch of speaking opportunities, and that's been in more recent years. So that's been one pivot that's come from the podcast. Apparently, this voice, which I've had since age 16, people actually want to hear in front of a listening audience. And one of those with Google at BGN, where I talked about rappers give horrible financial advice based on some advice I'd taken from Drake about the first million is the hardest. And then T-Bone Bookings replied, the first billion's even harder. So, a little motivation. And then also locally at the city of Austin, I spoke at the Association of Government Accountants about 5 money moves to make outside of your pension. And both of those came from podcast opportunities.
That's incredible. So yeah, you guys are putting out content, growing your show, but then subsequently growing your other forms of business, which is great. This is awesome. It's a great call for everybody too, to keep pushing forward, keep creating content, and then new opportunities arise. So thank you guys for taking the time to do this. This has been great. Tell us where people can listen to this awesome podcast.
Yes, you can find us at paychecksandbalances.com, on Twitter and Instagram at paybalances, on Facebook at Paychecks and Balances. Of course, we're on every podcast player that's out there. And we also have a private Facebook group where we kick it with the P&B community on Facebook at Paychecks and Balances. So we're all over the web, all over the podcast players. Check out the show today.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot for having us.
Thank you.